The massive space station Olympia Prime floated in the darkness of space like a glowing jewel. Its crystal walls reflected the light from 3 distant suns, creating rainbow patterns that danced across its surface. Inside the station, beings from across the galaxy gathered for the most watched event in known space, the Galactic Culinary Championships. Marcus Blake stood in front of his personal mirror, adjusting his chef's uniform for the 5th time. The white jacket was perfectly pressed with his name embroidered in gold thread across the chest. His dark hair was slicked back and his green eyes sparkled with confidence. He was Earth's champion, the best human chef in the galaxy, and he knew it, ladies and gentlemen, across 17 star systems. The announcer's voice echoed through the station's halls. Welcome to the 315th Galactic Culinary Championships. Today, we crown the greatest chef in known space. Blake smiled at his reflection. The title was already his, he was certain. It spent years perfecting his molecular gastronomy techniques, creating dishes that looked like art and tasted like nothing anyone had ever experienced. His restaurant chain, Blake's Universe, had locations on 47 different worlds. He was famous, rich, and about to become legendary. The competition arena was a massive dome filled with cooking stations, arranged in a perfect circle. Each station had equipment from dozens of different worlds designed to handle ingredients from across the galaxy. Hover cameras floated silently above, broadcasting every moment to billions of viewers. Blake walked to his assigned station, nodding to the cameras as they focused on him. His movements were smooth and practiced, like a dancer who had performed the same routine 1,000 times. Marcus Blake, representing Earth, the announcer continued 3-time champion of the Inner Colonies Cooking Festival, owner of the Blake's Universe restaurant empire, and author of the best-selling cookbook Evolution in the Kitchen. The crowd cheered. Mostly humans from the Earth colonies scattered throughout the viewing areas. Blake raised his hand and waved, his smile bright and confident. He was their hero, their representative, the man who would show the galaxy what human cooking could achieve. At the station next to him, a small woman with dark hair was quietly arranging her ingredients. She wore a simple white coat with no decorations, and her name tag read Lisa Chen Tao Seti Colonies. Blake glanced at her ingredients and almost laughed out loud. Rice, saffron, chicken, vegetables, all basic primitive ingredients that belonged in a history museum. Planning to cook for cavemen? Blake asked, loud enough for the nearby cameras to pick up his words. This is the Galactic Championships, not a camping trip. Lisa looked up at him with calm brown eyes. I'm cooking the food of my ancestors, she said quietly. The food that fed humans as they spread across the stars. Blake shook his head and turned to face the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying across the arena, this is exactly what's wrong with human cooking today. We're clinging to the past instead of embracing the future. We're in the stars now, not digging in the dirt on some primitive planet. The hover cameras moved closer, sensing drama. Blake had always been good at creating moments that would be replayed across the galaxy. Controversy sold tickets and brought viewers, and viewers brought fame. Paella, tapas, all of it. Peasant food from a dead culture. We're not farmers anymore. We're explorers, conquerors of space. Our food should reflect our evolution, not our primitive beginnings. A murmur went through the crowd. Many of the human spectators looked uncomfortable, but Blake didn't notice. He was in his element, performing for the cameras, saying the things that would make people talk about him for weeks. Spanish cuisine, he laughed, belongs in a museum, not in a modern kitchen. It's time we stop pretending that throwing rice and chicken into a pan is somehow sophisticated cooking. Across the arena, other contestants were preparing for the competition. Zara 29, a tall, blue-skinned being from the Andromedan Collective, was arranging crystalline spices that glowed with their own light. Faxel, an insect-like creature from the Centauri Republic, was testing the pH levels of various liquids with instruments that looked like musical instruments. But it was the quiet man at Station 7 who drew Blake's attention. He was human, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and calm dark eyes. He wore a simple chef's coat with no decorations, and his name tag read John Rivers, Cultural Preservation Specialist. He was arranging ingredients with careful precision, but Blake couldn't tell what he was planning to cook. Cultural preservation, Blake said loudly, making sure the cameras caught his words. Another one clinging to the past. Sir, this is a cooking competition, not a history lesson. Rivers looked up briefly, met Blake's eyes for a moment, then returned to his work without saying a word. Something about his calm demeanor irritated Blake, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The competition rules were simple. Each chef would have 6 hours to prepare a dish that represented their world's culinary traditions. They would be judged on taste, presentation, and cultural significance by a panel of 5 judges from different species. The winner would receive the Golden Spatula, a trophy that represented the highest achievement in galactic cooking. Blake had been planning his dish for months. It would be a molecular gastronomy masterpiece that would demonstrate human intelligence and creativity. He would use techniques that no other species had mastered, ingredients that existed only in laboratories, and presentation that would look like art from another dimension. The other contestants were already making their preparations. Lisa was soaking rice in aromatic stock, filling the air around her station with the scent of saffron and herbs. Rivers was sharpening knives with the precision of a surgeon, each blade gleaming under the arena lights. Contestants, the announcer's voice boomed through the arena. You have 6 hours to create a dish that represents the soul of your people's culinary heritage. The clock starts now. Blake smiled and began pulling ingredients from his storage. Today would be the day he proved that human cooking had evolved beyond the simple peasant dishes of the past. Today he would show the galaxy what real culinary artistry looked like. He had no idea that his words about Spanish food had been heard by millions of viewers across human space, or that his dismissal of traditional cooking had offended more people than he could imagine.
Ow.
All he knew was that he was about to win the most prestigious cooking competition in the galaxy, and nothing was going to stop him. The competition arena buzzed with activity as chefs from across the galaxy began their work. Steam rose from cooking stations, filling the air with strange and wonderful smells. The hover cameras moved silently between the contestants, capturing every moment for the billions of viewers watching across 17 star systems. Marcus. Blake worked at his station with theatrical flair. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact. He pulled out containers filled with ingredients that looked more like laboratory chemicals than food. Liquid nitrogen hissed as he poured it over crystallized flavor compounds. Pearls that burst with taste sat in precise rows on sterile metal trays. This is what real cooking looks like, Blake announced to the cameras hovering near his station. Science, precision, evolution, not throwing random ingredients into a pot, and hoping for the best. He glanced over at Lisa Chen, who was carefully browning chicken pieces in a large, traditional pan. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the air around her station. Blake wrinkled his nose in disgust. Look at that primitive technique, he said, making sure his voice carried to the microphones. Oh, she's literally using fire to cook meat. We have plasma heating, molecular reconstruction, flavor synthesis, and she's cooking like it's the Stone Age. Lisa continued her work without looking up. She moved with quiet confidence, each action deliberate and practiced. Her grandmother had taught her to make paella when she was 7 years old, back on Tau Ceti Prime. The recipe had traveled with her family across 3 different star systems, passed down through generations of women who refused to let their heritage die among the stars at Station 7. John Rivers worked with the same quiet intensity. He had arranged his ingredients in perfect order: tomatoes, onions, potatoes, eggs, olive oil, salt, simple ingredients that could be found on any human colony world. His movements were economical, wasting no energy, making no unnecessary flourishes. Blake noticed the judges beginning their first round of observations. The panel consisted of 5 beings from different worlds. There was Dr. Vex, a tall reptilian creature from the Sirius system who was considered the greatest food critic in known space. Madame Corvash, a floating jellyfish-like being from the Vega colonies whose species experienced taste through electromagnetic fields. Commander Yates, a human from the Mars colonies who had served as a military chef for 30 years. The twins Ral and Kex, identical blue-skinned beings from Proxima Centauri who shared a telepathic connection and could taste each other's experiences. But it was the sixth figure that caught Blake's attention. A human man in his 50s walked beside the official judges, observing each station with careful attention. He wore simple civilian clothes, dark pants, a plain shirt, and a jacket that had seen better days. His gray hair was slightly messy, and his dark eyes seemed to take in everything without judgment. "Who's the extra judge?" Blake asked one of the competition assistants. "That's John Rivers," the assistant replied. "He's a cultural preservation specialist. The judges requested his expertise for this year's competition since the theme focuses on culinary heritage." Blake studied Rivers more carefully. There was something about the man that didn't fit with his simple appearance. He moved with a kind of awareness that reminded Blake of security, personnel, or military types. His eyes never stopped moving, taking in details that most people would miss. "Cultural preservation," Blake muttered. "Another museum curator trying to keep us living in the past." The judges reached Blake's station first. Dr. Vex examined the molecular equipment with interest, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air around the cooking area. "Fascinating technique," Dr. Vex said in his rasping voice. "You're using quantum gastronomy principles to separate flavor compounds at the atomic level." Blake beamed with pride. "Exactly. And this is what separates advanced cooking from primitive techniques. I'm not just combining ingredients, I'm reconstructing them at the molecular level to create entirely new taste experiences." Rivers stood slightly behind the other judges, watching Blake work. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Tell us about your dish," Commander Yates requested. Blake gestured grandly at his equipment. "I'm creating what I call the future of human cuisine. It will represent our evolution from simple farmers to masters of space and science. Each component will be a perfect synthesis of technology and taste, showing what human cooking can achieve." "When we stop looking backward, what traditions are you drawing from?" Rivers asked quietly. It was the first time he had spoken. Blake paused, slightly annoyed by the interruption. "I'm not drawing from traditions. That's the point. I'm creating something entirely new, unburdened by the primitive cooking methods of the past." Rivers nodded slowly but said nothing more. The judges moved on to the next station. At Lisa's station, the judges found a completely different scene. She was building her paella layer by layer, the rice absorbing the rich golden stock flavored with saffron. Shrimp and mussels added their own essence to the mixture, while pieces of chicken and rabbit provided hearty protein. "This smells incredible," Commander Yates said, breathing in the aromatic steam rising from the pan. "It's paella," Lisa explained simply. "A dish from Valencia. On Earth, my great-grandmother brought the recipe with her when she emigrated to Tau Ceti. It's been in my family for over 200 years. Dr. Vex extended his tongue toward the pan, sampling the complex mixture of flavors. In the air, the combination is remarkably sophisticated. "How many different ingredients are you balancing?" 12 main components, Lisa replied, but the real skill is in understanding how they work together. The rice must absorb the flavors without becoming mushy. The proteins must cook at different rates. The saffron needs exactly the right amount of heat to release its full flavor. Rivers stepped closer, studying the dish with obvious interest. "Your family maintained this recipe across interstellar distances?" Lisa nodded. "My grandmother said that as long as we remembered how to make paella, we would never forget who we were or where we came from." Blake, who had been listening from his nearby station, couldn't contain himself. "That's exactly the problem with human cooking today," he called out loudly. "We're so busy looking backward that we can't see forward. Spanish food, Chinese food, Italian food, it's all just ethnic nostalgia holding us back from achieving our real potential." The arena fell quiet. Even the other alien contestants stopped their work to listen. "Spanish cuisine," Blake continued, warming to his theme, "is the perfect example. Peasant food from a backward agricultural society. Throwing rice and meat into a pan isn't cooking, it's just assembly. Real cooking requires science, precision, innovation." not following some grandmother's recipe from the Dark Ages. Rivers turned slowly to face Blake. For a moment, something flickered in his calm eyes. Not anger, but a kind of measuring look, as if he was seeing Blake clearly for the first time. "Interesting perspective," Rivers said quietly. Then he moved on with the other judges, leaving Blake feeling strangely unsettled. The tour continued. But Blake found himself watching Rivers more than focusing on his own cooking. There was something about the man that didn't add up, something that made Blake's instincts itch with unease. 3 hours into the competition, the arena was filled with the sounds and smells of cooking from across the galaxy. Steam hissed from alien equipment, strange spices filled the air with unfamiliar scents, and the hover cameras captured every moment for the viewers watching from billions of worlds. Marcus Blake was in his element. His molecular gastronomy station looked more like a science laboratory than a kitchen. Precise measurements of chemicals created flavors that had never existed in nature. He used tools that could manipulate matter at the atomic level, building tastes molecule by molecule. "This is what evolution looks like," Blake announced to the cameras, holding up a sphere of crystallized flavor that glowed with its own inner light. While other species cling to their primitive cooking methods, humans have transcended the limitations of traditional cuisine. At the station beside him, a young human chef named Alex Martinez was struggling with his preparation. He was only 22 years old, representing the Outer Rim colonies where resources were scarce and traditional cooking methods were still common. His planned dish was a simple Spanish tapas spread small plates of food that told the story of his family's journey from Earth to the frontier worlds. Blake noticed Alex's hesitation and decided to offer some advice. "Kid," he said, loud enough for the cameras to hear, "this is the big leagues. You can't win a galactic championship with bar snacks from ancient Spain." Alex looked up from his cutting board where he was preparing Jamin and Manchego cheese. His dark eyes showed uncertainty. "My grandmother's recipes got my family through the hard years on the Rim worlds," he said quietly. "I thought they might mean something here too." Blake laughed, a sound that carried across the arena. "Mean something? To who?" "The judges are looking for innovation, for artistry, for dishes that represent the future of cooking, not some nostalgic trip to old Earth." "But the theme is culinary heritage," Alex protested. "These recipes are 400 years old. They've traveled across the galaxy with human settlers." "Exactly my point," Blake said, turning to face the cameras. 400 years old. We're not our ancestors, kid. We're not Spanish farmers or Italian fishermen or Chinese peasants. We're citizens of the galaxy. Our food should reflect our achievements, not our limitations. Dr. Vex, the reptilian judge, paused near Blake's station during his second round of observations. "Your technique is certainly advanced," he observed, watching Blake manipulate flavor compounds with precision instruments. "But tell us more about the cultural significance of your dish." Blake gestured confidently at his equipment. "The cultural significance is evolution itself. This dish represents humanity's journey from primitive cooking methods to mastery of molecular gastronomy. Every component is a testament to human intelligence and innovation." "And what traditions are you building upon?" asked Madame Corvash, her translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. "That's just it," Blake replied. "I'm not building on traditions. I'm moving beyond them. Traditional cooking is a crutch that keeps us trapped in the past. Real culinary artistry means breaking free from the limitations our ancestors accepted." John Rivers, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the judge group, stepped forward. He said, "So you believe traditional techniques have no value in modern cooking?" Blake turned to face Rivers directly. "I respect what you do with your art. Cultural preservation work, but this is a cooking competition, not a history lesson. Traditional techniques were developed by people with limited ingredients, primitive tools, and no understanding of food science. Why would we limit ourselves to their methods when we have access to technology they couldn't even imagine?" Rivers nodded slowly. "I see. In Spanish cuisine specifically." Blake's eyes lit up. This was his favorite topic. Spanish cuisine is the perfect example of everything wrong with traditional cooking. Take paella, you throw some rice, chicken, and vegetables into a pan with saffron and call it sophisticated cooking. There's no precision, no innovation, no artistry. It's peasant food dressed up as fine dining. Several people in the viewing area shifted uncomfortably. Many of the human spectators had family connections to Spain, or had grown up eating traditional Spanish food on the colony worlds. Blake's words stung more than he realized. The whole tapas concept is even worse, Blake continued, warming to his theme. Small plates of simple ingredients, cheese, olives, bread, ham. It's not cooking, it's just arrangement. It's any child could put together a tapas plate. There's no skill involved, no creativity, no evolution. Alex Martinez had stopped working entirely, staring at Blake with a mixture of hurt and anger. His planned tapas presentation suddenly seemed foolish and simple compared to the molecular marvels being created around him. Spanish cooking techniques haven't changed in centuries, Blake went on. They're still using the same methods their great-great-grandparents used. No innovation, no improvement, no adaptation to modern possibilities. It's culinary stagnation disguised as tradition. Rivers' expression remained calm, but something shifted in his dark eyes. You believe adaptation and innovation are incompatible with traditional methods? Absolutely, Blake replied confidently. You can't move forward while looking backward. Traditional cooking is a dead end. The future of cuisine lies in science, in precision, in techniques that create experiences impossible through primitive methods. The other contestants continued their work, but many were listening to Blake's speech. Zaranine from the Andromedan Collective was creating a dish that combined traditional crystalline formations with flavors that had been passed down through her species for millennia. Thaxel was using ancient fermentation techniques from his homeworld, methods that had been refined over thousands of years. Lisa Chen worked steadily on her paella, adding ingredients with practiced timing. The rice was beginning to develop. The perfect texture, absorbing the rich stock while maintaining its individual grains. The seafood released its essence into the mixture, creating layers of flavor that had made the dish famous across human space. Traditional cooking is emotional. Cooking, Blake announced, his voice carrying across the arena. It's about feelings and memories instead of actual culinary excellence. Modern chefs need to move beyond emotional attachments to primitive techniques. Rivers walked slowly around Blake's station, observing the molecular gastronomy equipment with apparent interest. And you believe emotion has no place in cooking? Blake paused in his work, surprised by the question. Motion clouds judgment. It makes chefs cling to inferior methods because of sentimental attachment. Great cooking requires objectivity, scientific precision, and freedom from the limitations of the past. Interesting philosophy, Rivers said quietly. He moved on to observe Lisa's work, leaving Blake feeling oddly unsettled once again. As the competition progressed, Blake's confidence grew. His dish was taking shape beautifully, a perfect example of molecular gastronomy that would demonstrate human evolution beyond traditional cooking methods. The flavors were precisely calibrated, the presentation would be stunning, and the technique was flawless. But something about John Rivers continued to bother him. The man's quiet confidence, his careful observations, and his pointed questions suggested there was more to the cultural preservation specialist than met the eye. Blake shook off the feeling. After today's victory, it wouldn't matter what some museum curator thought. About his cooking philosophy, the arena filled with the final preparations as chefs across the galaxy raced to complete their dishes. Time was running short, and the real test was about to begin. With only 2 hours remaining in the competition, the tension in the arena had reached its peak. Marcus Blake was putting the finishing touches on his molecular gastronomy masterpiece, a dish that looked more like a work of art than food, crystalline. Structures held concentrated flavors, and edible holograms danced above the plate, creating a visual spectacle that made the hover cameras focus on his station. Ladies and gentlemen, Blake announced to the cameras, what you're seeing here is the future of human cuisine. This dish represents our species' complete evolution beyond the primitive cooking methods of our ancestors. He gestured toward Lisa Chen's station, where she was carefully arranging the final components of her paella. The large pan held perfectly. Cooked rice, golden with saffron, topped with prawns, mussels, chicken, and vegetables. The aroma filled the entire section of the arena. Compare this scientific achievement to that basic rice dish, Blake said with a dismissive wave. One represents human progress, the other represents our past limitations. The choice should be obvious to any intelligent judge. Alex Martinez had abandoned his tapas preparation entirely after Blake's earlier criticism. The young chef stood at his station, staring at his simple ingredients with doubt and shame. His cutting board held slices of jamin, pieces of manchego cheese, and small portions of foods that had sustained his family through 3 generations of frontier life. "I don't know what to do," Alex said quietly to one of the camera operators. "Maybe he's right. Maybe these old recipes don't belong in a galactic competition," Blake overheard and decided to offer more advice. "Kid, it's not too late to salvage something from this disaster. Forget the Spanish peasant food. Use those ingredients to create something modern, something that shows you understand evolution in cooking." John Rivers had been moving quietly between the stations, observing each chef's final preparations, but now he stopped and walked to one of the unused cooking stations near the center of the arena. The hover cameras, always alert for unusual activity, began to focus on him. "What's the preservation specialist doing?" Blake asked, pausing in his own work to watch. Rivers began pulling ingredients from the station's storage unit. Simple ingredients: eggs, potatoes, onions, olive oil, salt. Basic items that could be found on any human colony world. He arranged them with the same careful precision he had shown throughout the competition. "Is he cooking?" Dr. Vex asked, approaching Rivers' station with curiosity. "Just a demonstration," Rivers replied quietly. "I thought it might be helpful to show something while we wait for the contestants to finish." Blake laughed loudly. "A demonstration of what?" "How to make peasant food. This is a competition, not a cooking class for beginners." Rivers didn't respond to Blake's comment. Instead, he began to work with movements that were smooth and precise. He sliced potatoes into perfect rounds, each one exactly the same thickness. His knife work was flawless, economical, with no wasted motion. "Those are some serious knife skills," Commander Yates observed. Watching Rivers work, Blake studied Rivers more carefully. The man's technique was far more advanced than his simple ingredients suggested. His cuts were perfect, his timing was precise, and his movements had a kind of deadly efficiency that reminded Blake of something he couldn't quite place. "You've had professional training," Blake said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Rivers looked up briefly. "I've had many kinds of training," he said simply, then returned to his work. He heated olive oil in a pan with the kind of temperature control that took years to master. The oil reached exactly the right heat, hot enough to cook without burning, cool enough to preserve the delicate flavors. He added the sliced potatoes, and they began to cook with a gentle sizzling sound. "What are you making?" asked Madame Corbache, her bioluminescent body pulsing with interest. "Tortilla espanola," Rivers replied. "Spanish omelet. One of the most basic dishes in Spanish cuisine." Blake's expression changed from amusement to irritation. "Seriously? You're making eggs and potatoes? That's your idea of a demonstration? Anyone can scramble eggs." Rivers continued his work without looking up. "Can they?" he asked quietly. The potatoes cooked slowly, Rivers moving them gently in the oil to ensure even cooking. Each slice became golden and tender without breaking apart. The technique required patience and skill. Too much heat would burn them, too little would leave them raw, too much movement would break them apart. "The key," Rivers said, his voice carrying across the arena as the cameras focused on his hands, "is understanding that simple doesn't mean easy. This dish has fed Spanish families for centuries. Traveled with them when they colonized the Americas. Went with them to the stars when they joined the first colony ships." Blake couldn't contain himself. "Still just eggs and potatoes. You can dress it up with history lessons all you want, but it's primitive cooking. No innovation, no evolution, no advancement beyond what some farmer made 500 years ago." Rivers drained the potatoes and began beating eggs in a bowl. His technique was perfect. The eggs became smooth and creamy without being overworked. "You think evolution means abandoning everything that came before? In cooking?" "Absolutely," Blake replied. Traditional techniques were developed by people with limited knowledge and primitive tools. We have molecular gastronomy, quantum flavor, synthesis, atomic level, ingredient manipulation. Why would we limit ourselves to their crude methods? Rivers poured the beaten eggs over the potatoes, combining them with gentle movements that preserve the integrity of both ingredients. And you believe Spanish cuisine has nothing to offer modern cooking? Blake gestured dramatically at his own station, where his molecular masterpiece was taking its final form. Spanish cooking is the perfect example of culinary stagnation. Tapas, tortilla. It's all peasant food that refuses to evolve. They're still using the same techniques their great-grandparents used, with no understanding of modern food science. I see, Rivers said quietly. He placed his pan over the heat and began to cook the tortilla with movements that were both gentle and precise. So you believe these techniques require no skill? Compared to real molecular gastronomy? No skill? At all, Blake said confidently. Any child could throw eggs and potatoes together and call it cooking. Rivers flipped the tortilla with a single smooth motion, turning it perfectly without breaking the delicate egg structure. The action was so smooth and controlled that several judges stopped to watch. Impressive technique, Dr. Vex commented. Blake felt a flash of annoyance. It's just an omelet. There's nothing impressive about basic egg cookery. Rivers looked up from his cooking and met Blake's eyes directly. For the first time, his expression showed something other than calm observation. There was a measuring quality in his gaze, as if he was seeing Blake clearly for the first time. You mock the food of Spain, Rivers said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. Yet you understand neither its history nor its heart. Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. There was something in Rivers' tone, something in the way he held himself, that suggested this conversation was about to change in ways Blake hadn't expected. Spanish cuisine survived the colonial expansion. Rivers continued, his hands never stopping their work on the tortilla. It adapted to new ingredients, new environments, new worlds. It became the foundation for fusion cooking across human space. And you dismiss it as peasant food. The arena had grown quiet. Even the other contestants had stopped their work to listen. Blake suddenly realized that every camera in the arena was focused on this moment, broadcasting his words to billions of viewers across human space. Stand by what I said, Blake replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Traditional cooking holds us back from achieving our real potential. Rivers nodded slowly, then set down his cooking tools and faced Blake directly. The simple demonstration had become something much more significant, and Blake was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake. The arena fell completely silent. Even the background hum of cooking equipment seemed to fade as John Rivers set down his cooking tools and turned to face Marcus Blake directly. The hover cameras moved closer, sensing that something important was about to happen. Blake felt a strange chill run down his spine. There was something different about Rivers now, something that hadn't been there before. The quiet cultural preservation specialist was gone, replaced by someone who carried himself with unmistakable authority. You want to see evolution? Rivers asked, his voice calm but carrying clearly across the entire arena. Let me show you what real evolution looks like. Blake tried to maintain his confident smile, but something in Rivers' tone made him uneasy. I'm not sure what you mean. Are you planning to cook something else? Rivers ignored the question and began speaking in a voice that commanded attention. My name is John Rivers. I served 12 years in the Colonial Defense Forces, 3 tours in the Proxima Wars, 2 years on the frontier during the Centauri conflict. Blake's smile faded. The Proxima Wars were legendary brutal conflicts on the edge of human space, where only the toughest soldiers survived. The Centauri conflict had been even worse. A series of battles that had tested human courage and determination like nothing before. I've eaten military rations on 17 different worlds. Rivers continued, his hands moving to prepare ingredients while he spoke. I've survived on emergency supplies for weeks at a time. I've cooked with equipment salvaged from crashed ships and ingredients foraged from alien worlds. Dr. Vex and the other judges moved closer, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Commander Yates, the military chef, stared at Rivers with obvious respect. After the wars, I became a cultural preservation specialist, Because I understood something that people like you will never understand, Rivers said, his eyes never leaving Blake's face. Tradition isn't about clinging to the past. It's about carrying the best of who we are into the future. Blake opened his mouth to argue, but Rivers continued before he could speak. You mock Spanish cuisine, but let me tell you what Spanish cuisine really is, Rivers said, beginning to prepare a new dish with movements that were both economical and precise. Spanish cuisine is survival, it's adaptation. It's taking whatever ingredients you can find and turning them into something that feeds your family. He pulled out ingredients that seemed impossible items from a dozen different worlds. Alien spices, proteins that Blake had never seen before. But Rivers handled them all with the confidence of someone who had cooked in every corner of human space. When the first Spanish colonists reached Alpha Centauri, they didn't have Earth vegetables, Rivers explained, his knife work flawless as he prepared alien ingredients using traditional techniques. They learned to use Centauri root vegetables. When they reached the Tau Ceti system, they adapted their paella recipes to include local seafood that had never existed on Earth. Blake watched in growing amazement as Rivers created something that looked like paella, but contained ingredients from across the galaxy. The technique was traditional, but the result was unlike anything Blake had ever seen. That's not evolution, Blake protested weakly. That's just substitution. Rivers looked up from his work, and Blake saw something in his eyes that made him take a step backward. Is it? Let me tell you about real molecular gastronomy, Blake. Rivers moved to Blake's station and examined the equipment with the eye of an expert. Quantum flavor synthesis, he said, pointing to one device, useful for creating new taste experiences. But do you know where the foundational research came from? Blake stared at him, suddenly uncertain. Dr. Maria Santos, University of Madrid 23 years ago, Rivers said calmly. She was studying how traditional Spanish fermentation techniques created complex flavor compounds. Her research into the molecular structure of Jamon Iberico led directly to quantum flavor synthesis. Blake felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. That's not possible. Molecular gastronomy is completely modern. Rivers moved to another piece of equipment. Atomic-level ingredient manipulation. Invented by Dr. Carlos Ruiz at the Barcelona Institute of Culinary Science. He was trying to understand why traditional Spanish olive oil had such complex flavor profiles. His work on molecular bonding in traditional foods created the entire field. The judges were listening intently, and Blake realized that Rivers wasn't just making claims, he was stating facts that could be verified. Facts that Blake, in his arrogance, had never bothered to learn. Your crystalline flavor structures, Rivers continued, examining Blake's dish, are based on research by Dr. Elena Vega. She was studying the molecular structure of saffron, the spice that makes paella golden. Her discovery of how saffron molecules bond with rice proteins led to crystalline flavor technology. Blake's confidence was crumbling. You're making this up. Rivers pulled out a small device and projected a holographic display showing research papers, patent filings, and scientific publications. Every claim he had made was documented and verifiable. 90% of modern molecular gastronomy techniques are based on research into traditional cooking methods, Rivers said calmly. Researchers studied why traditional techniques worked, then found ways to improve and expand on them. You're not moving beyond tradition, Blake. You're using tradition without understanding it. Blake looked at his own dish, his masterpiece of molecular gastronomy, and suddenly saw it differently. Every technique he had used, every innovation he was so proud of, was built on foundations he had dismissed as primitive. Now let me show you what real evolution looks like, Rivers said. Returning to his own cooking, Rivers began creating a dish that seamlessly blended traditional Spanish techniques with advanced culinary science. He used molecular gastronomy tools to enhance traditional flavors rather than replace them. He incorporated ingredients from 7 different worlds, but prepared them using methods that had been perfected over centuries. This is Paella del Futuro, Rivers explained as he worked. It uses bomba rice grown in the hydroponic farms of Europa, saffron cultivated in the greenhouse domes of Mars, seafood from the methane seas of Titan, and vegetables that exist only in the artificial biomes of deep space stations. Blake watched in stunned silence as Rivers created something impossible, a dish that was both completely traditional and utterly futuristic. The cooking method is exactly the same as my great-grandmother used in Valencia 300 years ago, Rivers continued. But the ingredients represent every human colony in known space. This is real evolution, Blake, building on the past, not abandoning it. The aroma rising from Rivers' pan was incredible, familiar, and alien at the same time. It's comforting and exotic, traditional and revolutionary. You called Spanish cuisine peasant food, Rivers said, his voice hardening slightly. But peasant food is survivor food. It's the food of people who refuse to give up, who adapt and overcome, who carry their culture across impossible distances and impossible odds. Blake tried to speak, but no words came. Everything he had believed about cooking, about evolution, about progress, was falling apart around him. Spanish cuisine didn't stay static, Blake, Rivers said, adding the final ingredients to his dish. It conquered the galaxy. Every fusion restaurant in human space uses Spanish techniques. Every colony world has adapted Spanish recipes to local ingredients. You're not beyond Spanish cooking, you're swimming in it, without even realizing it. Rivers completed his dish and set it before the judges. The paella was perfect, golden rice studded with ingredients from across human space, prepared with techniques that had traveled from Earth to the stars. This, Rivers said quietly, is what evolution really looks like. Blake stared at the dish, then at his own molecular creation, and realized that everything he thought he knew about cooking had been wrong. The judges approached John Rivers' station with expressions of amazement. The paella del futuro sat before them, golden rice, glistening with ingredients from across human space, steam carrying an aroma that somehow managed to be both familiar and completely new. Dr. Vex was the first to taste it. The reptilian judge's forked tongue flicked out, sampling the complex mixture of flavors in the air before he took an actual bite. His large eyes widened in surprise. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Vex said, his rasping voice filled with wonder. "The flavor profile is incredibly sophisticated. How many different worlds are represented in this dish?" 7 colony systems, Rivers replied calmly. "But the technique is 300 years old. It's from Valencia on Earth. The recipe traveled with Spanish colonists to every human settlement in known space." Madame Corvache floated closer, her translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. As she experienced the flavors through her electromagnetic senses, the harmony is perfect. Each ingredient maintains its individual character while contributing to a unified whole. How is this possible? Traditional Spanish cooks understood. Balance long before we had scientific explanations for it, Rivers explained. They knew that saffron would bind the flavors together, that the rice would absorb the essence of each ingredient, that timing and temperature control were more important than expensive equipment. Commander Yates took a bite and closed his eyes, savoring the complex flavors. "I've eaten on 40 different worlds," he said quietly. "This is the most complete dish I've ever tasted. It tells the story of human expansion across the galaxy." The twins, Ral and Kex, shared their telepathic taste experience, their blue faces showing expressions of pure joy. "We taste the history," they said in unison. "We taste the journey of your people among the stars." Marcus Blake stood frozen at his own station, watching the judges praise a dish made with techniques he had spent the entire competition mocking. His molecular gastronomy masterpiece suddenly looked cold and artificial by comparison. "But we should also judge the other entries," Dr. Vex said. Turning toward the official contestants, the judges moved to Lisa Chen's station first. Her paella was traditional and perfect, the rice cooked to exactly the right texture, the seafood and chicken adding their essence to the golden mixture. She had prepared it exactly as her grandmother had taught her, using techniques that had been passed down through generations. "This is beautiful work," Commander Yates said after tasting her dish. "Classic technique, perfectly executed. You can taste the love and tradition in every bite." Lisa smiled quietly. "My great-grandmother said that paella wasn't just food, it was family. Every time we make it, we remember who we are." Blake watched the judges praise Lisa's simple, traditional cooking. Everything he had said about Spanish cuisine being primitive now seemed foolish and ignorant. The judges reached Blake's station. Last, his molecular gastronomy creation was visually stunning. Crystalline structures held concentrated flavors. Edible holograms danced above the plate. And every component had been precisely engineered at the atomic level, Dr. Vex examined. The dish with scientific interest? The technical execution is flawless, he admitted. The molecular structure is perfect. The flavor combinations are precisely calibrated. Blake felt a moment of hope. Perhaps his technical skill would be enough to win, despite Rivers' demonstration. However, Dr. Vex continued, taking another taste. There is something missing. The flavors are precise, but cold. There is no story here, no heart, no connection to anything larger than itself. Madame Corvash's bioluminescent patterns shifted to cooler colors. It could have been made by any species with the right equipment. There is nothing uniquely human about it. Commander Yates was more direct. It's technically impressive, but it doesn't taste like anything. It's a demonstration of skill without purpose. Blake felt his world collapsing around him. But the innovation, the evolution, beyond traditional methods. Innovation built on ignorance is not evolution, Rivers said quietly from across the arena. It's just expensive noise. The judges completed their evaluation and gathered to make their decision. The arena buzzed with quiet conversation as spectators discussed what they had witnessed. The hover cameras continued broadcasting, every moment to the billions of viewers across human space. Alex Martinez approached Blake's station, hesitantly. The young chef had watched Rivers' demonstration with growing excitement, and now his eyes shone with renewed confidence. "I'm going to finish my tapas presentation," Alex said quietly. "My grandmother's recipes deserve to be shown, even if I don't win." Blake looked at the simple ingredients Alex was arranging: jamin, cheese, olives, bread. Foods that had sustained Spanish families for centuries, that had traveled with colonists to the frontier worlds, that had helped build human civilization across the galaxy. "Those recipes are 400 years old," Blake said, but his voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. "Exactly," Alex replied with a smile. "They're survivors, just like us." The judges returned to announce their decision. Dr. Vex stepped forward as the senior judge. "The winner of the 315th Galactic Culinary Championships," Dr. Vex announced, "represents the finest qualities of culinary tradition combined with innovation and adaptation. The dish tells a story that spans centuries and light years, connecting the past with the future through the universal language of food." Blake held his breath, still hoping that his technical skill might have impressed the judges enough to win. Winner is Lisa Chen, representing the Tau Ceti colonies, for a traditional pagella that carries the heritage of human space exploration in every grain of rice. The arena erupted in cheers. Lisa stood at her station, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the honor of representing not just her own cooking, but the traditions of countless families who had carried their recipes across the stars. Stared in shock, his molecular masterpiece, his demonstration of advanced cooking techniques, his evolution beyond traditional methods, none of it had mattered. Second place, Dr. Vex continued, goes to John Rivers for his Paella del Futuro. A perfect demonstration of how tradition and innovation can work together to create something truly extraordinary. Rivers accepted the recognition with quiet dignity. He had not been an official contestant, but his demonstration had earned the respect of judges and spectators alike. And third place goes to Alex Martinez for his tapas presentation, which showed how simple ingredients and traditional techniques can tell powerful stories about family, heritage, and survival. Alex's face lit up with joy. His simple Spanish dishes had earned recognition at the galactic level, validating everything his grandmother had taught him about the value of traditional cooking. Blake received no mention at all. His technically perfect dish was ignored, dismissed as impressive, but meaningless. As the ceremonies concluded and the spectators began to leave, Blake found himself alone at his station, staring at his molecular creation. Everything he had believed about cooking, about progress, about evolution, had been wrong. Rivers approached him quietly. "Your techniques are impressive," he said. but technique without understanding is just showing off. Real cooking connects people to their history, their culture, their families. It tells stories that matter. Blake looked up at Rivers with new respect. I don't understand. How did I get it so wrong? You forgot that food is about more than flavor, Rivers replied. It's about identity, memory, love, survival. Spanish. Cuisine isn't peasant food. It's the food of explorers, survivors, people who refuse to give up their heritage even when they traveled to the stars. Blake nodded slowly, finally beginning to understand. His molecular gastronomy skills could be incredible tools, but only if he used them to honor tradition rather than replace it. The galaxy is big enough for both innovation and tradition, Rivers said. The trick is learning how they work together. As the space station prepared to return its visitors to their home worlds, Blake began to think about what he would cook next. Perhaps it was time to learn about the traditions he had spent so long dismissing. Perhaps it was time to discover what his own heritage could teach him about real cooking. The arrogant chef who had mocked Spain on live television was gone. In his place stood someone ready to learn what it really meant to cook with both skill and heart.